This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back. Nathan Romas with you. Today, we are going to be talking about ideological extremism, some of the recruiting elements in it, and even anti-racism and how that fits into the bigger picture. For that, I have Arno Michaelis here. Arno is a speaker, a filmmaker, and author of My Life After Hate, and co-author of The Gift of Our Wounds. But before all that, at the age of 17, Arno was deeply involved with the white power movement. He was a founding member of what became the largest racist skinhead organization in the world and lead singer of the race metal band Centurion. Now, he works as an interventionist with groups such as Parents for Peace and helping to lead people away from all violent extremist ideologies and to support their families. So welcome, Arno.
Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it.
I can only do you so much justice in the bio. I mean, you have a film out now. You're doing speaking all over. And as I was saying just before we kind of started this up, I'll refer to a video which I'll post a link for in the episode description. A video interview that you did with Business Insider, and man, people got to watch it. Like you are really on point with a lot of how people think about this stuff. Not just within the groups, but society in general and some of the stuff that is going on. So I just want to give you kudos right off the top on that.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, the Business Insider thing came out really well, and it's getting a lot of traction.
Yeah, I think you might be up over 2 million views last time I looked at it. It's way up there.
Something like that. Yeah, it's certainly catching fire. And that's really, they did such a great job on it. The gentleman who interviewed me, I want to get his full name right. Nazar. No, I don't have his name handy, but his first name was Nazar, and he did an awesome job. Nazar Rasafi.
Okay.
He was the one interviewing me off camera, and his questions really led to that great discussion. So I want to give him credit.
Yeah, no, it was really good. And as I said, I'll put up the link because people need to listen to this stuff. And it gives that deeper meaning rather than everybody just screaming someone's a racist. Boy, there's so much depth to a lot of this. And that kind of leads us into maybe one of the first things we can talk about here is the story of extremist groups. And in the video, one of the ideas or ways that you kind of frame things is you talk about romantic violence. So can you kind of expand on that, what you mean by romantic violence, and what are some of the underpinnings of these groups and their thought processes?
Yeah, so romantic violence was two words put together by a gang called the Chicago Area Skinheads, like back before my time. To my knowledge, they were the first white power skinhead gang in the United States. And they were importing physical copies of UK white power skinhead bands to Chicago and then actually selling them in record stores and concerts and whatnot. And also distributing cassettes of that music. And it's important to understand that in the late 80s, for people outside of my generation, which spans the pre-internet and post-internet era, like the late 80s, there was no internet. So the most powerful vector for white nationalist ideology was music at the time. And that name romantic violence, to me, there's not a better two-word way to sum up the attraction of the ideology. Romantic in the sense of, you're part of this greater saga, like fighting for your people against this evil enemy horde that's trying to wipe you out. It's all very like Lord of the Rings-esque.
Yeah.
Kind of, Robert E. Howard, Conan, which as a kid really appealed to me because I was really into fantasy and mythology and Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And that romantic violence is it just kind of encapsulates the feeling of a kid who really doesn't have a good self-image, doesn't have a lot of identity, purpose, or belonging in their life. And here's this, albeit toxic as hell, but very seductive ideology out there to just draw kids in and say, yes, if you adopt this ideology as your identity, then you will be a hero. You will be a hero to your people, and you can fight in this epic battle of which everything is at stake. And that kind of hyperbole actually goes back to the Third Reich. And it was much of the same dynamic that Hitler used to pervert the minds of so many Germans.
Yeah, and I mean that there's a bunch of ways I could take that one. It sounds like a lot of the stuff that you see from any kind of ideological extremism, like they all kind of follow that similar suit. They're doing the calling to it's a call to a bigger cause, and especially preying on people who maybe have trouble in their life, but also don't have the frame of reference. Maybe something's lacking there. Like you look at it's a lot of young males that get attracted to it now, females as well, but it's not generally like the 40-year-old guy who's deciding to join at that time in his life. It's always someone in their teens, early adulthood seem to kind of be the typical group to look for. So
absolutely, and you're very correct in pointing out that it's this idea of romantic violence isn't exclusive to white nationalists. If you look at, as our friend and colleague Mubin Sheikh puts it, if you look at terrorists in Muslim clothing, their narratives are dead on the exact same. You're a part of the Ummah, fighting against the infidels for the caliphate.
Yeah.
It's really the same story. You're just kind of swapping around the particulars of us versus them. And I think, especially nowadays, considering all these campus protests that claim to be pro-Palestinian, but really are more pro-Hamas, you see a lot of that same romantic violence dynamic in these protests, and that they're protesting against this horrible white supremacist colonizer apartheid regime when really all of that is objectively false. And what allows people to see past the objective falseness of it is that romantic violence. I'm fighting for these people who are oppressed, and that I think if you distill it is really what romantic violence boils down to, is the idea of the oppressed people fighting against an oppressor. And again, you're really just swapping in the particulars in and out. It doesn't matter if the oppressor is white, if the oppressor is black, if the oppressor is Jewish, if they're capitalist, if they're communist. It's the idea of we're oppressed and we're fighting against the evil oppressors. That's what romantic violence boils down to.
And that sounds like a lot of power dynamics, right? Someone's always holding the power and they're using it against the others. One of the things also that I think you do a really good job of explaining is talking about the mental gymnastics that you have to do. And when I'm reading through your story and how you describe, you come across another group of skinheads or neo-Nazis or however they classify themselves, and you're like, well, you're like, oh, they said Heil Hitler or something. So you're like, yeah, they're good enough for me and they can kind of join the cause. But it's just funny how like everybody ended up being kind of an outsider to you and your group. So you and your immediate friends are like the pinnacle of what you could be. And then everyone else, you almost found a reason to not like them or hate them outright. So it was like you were constantly coming up with ways to not like somebody. And then especially when it is a different race or the religion or whatever it might be. So, can you talk a bit about that? Like how exhausting that must be to constantly justify your own point of view, even though now you point out like the hypocrisy of a lot of it.
I think what that stems from is another thing that's very common amongst every violent extremist narrative that there is, and that's this idea of purity.
Okay.
Now, in white nationalism, it's always very front and center. The whole idea of like a pure Aryan race, blonde hair, blue eyes, like your purity is racial. But it's actually much more so about ideological purity.
Okay.
Because I mean, nowadays I got blonde hair, blue eyes. I took a 23andMe test. I'm about as objectively white as anyone could possibly be. But because I don't think in lockstep with white nationalists, I'm ideologically impure and therefore an enemy and someone to look down upon.
And you're almost considered in those groups worse, right? Because you were is that the race traitor?
Yeah, there's as you can imagine, white nationalists have a big long list of all the people that they hate, and everyone is on that list. But number 2 on the list is Jews. Number 1 on the list is the white race traitor, which is considered the highest order of enemy because in their mind, if you're white, you should be fighting for your race and your people. And if you're not, you're much more of a problem than other groups that are just kind of seen as like they're natural. They're seen as in their natural role, according to white nationalists, which is their natural role is to destroy the white race, and that's to be expected. Whereas they expect white people racialized as white. And it's important to understand that this idea of race is completely concocted social theory that only goes back 400 years. Our human beings have been around about 200,000 years. The idea of like me being white because of my complexion or someone else being black because of they have more melanin in their skin than I do is really only 400 years old, and there's no legitimate science behind it. It was really concocted by racists in order to perpetrate racism.
Yeah.
But if to get into a white nationalist ideology, you have to first buy into this idea of a racial identity. And that's when we were in the group, we were constantly we're constantly fighting amongst ourselves, for one. An organization whose organizational culture is hate and violence isn't going to be the most functional organization.
Yeah.
Go figure. And when the organization was dysfunctional, whoever you had a problem with, like all of a sudden their purity became suspect. I think that guy is a Jew. I think he's part American Indian. I think he's part Mexican. There's always some sort of accusation of impurity that gets cast against that person. And what's really interesting is that obviously this is a identical dynamic in violent Islamism.
Yeah.
Where it's, you never pray hard enough, you never fast long enough, you never are, you take in haram, infidel propaganda. There's all sorts of places to make accusations of impurity. But what a lot of people don't understand also is like I have cases where I'm working with people getting out of Antifa groups, and what they describe to me as well is exactly the same purity thing. You're not trans enough. You're not queer enough. You're not non-binary enough. Or you're white, and therefore everything is your fault. And so it's always looking for this impossible standard of purity. And I think what's behind it is when they're projecting their own inadequacies. When you don't feel good about yourself and you don't feel adequate, you don't have a good self-image, a really easy way to temporarily assuage that is to consider yourself more pure than whoever else. And I think that's why it keeps, that idea of purity keeps showing up in all violent extremist narratives.
So it would be kind of like you're putting others down because you can't build yourself up. So you're just trying to knock them all down.
Exactly. If you don't have anything in your life, and this is the real convenient thing about this idea of race. Whereas if you're racialized as white and you really don't have anything going for you, you're not succeeding in school, you're not popular, you don't have friends, maybe you got a lot of dysfunction in your family, most likely you do. It's a boost to associate yourself with all of the accomplishments of the white man. Like, oh, the white man has done all these great things and he's done all those great things. And I'm a part of that because I'm white.
Yeah.
Never mind that I haven't done anything but be born.
Yeah.
But
you're like, those guys don't know your name.
Right, exactly. And that's part of the appeal to it. And again, that same dynamic applies to terrorists in Muslim clothing. It applies to Antifa. It's just you're just swapping in different us's and thems.
So maybe because you brought up a few elements there that run into the recruitment side of things, and the way you described it in the video, you talked about kind of 2 steps in the recruiting process that you guys would have. And as I'm listening to this, it's like with the groups you're bringing up, like Antifa, whatever, there's Middle Eastern groups or the protests that are going on. You have 2 steps. One was from the group that you were with to get them to identify as white. And then 2 was to make the person feel persecuted because they were white. And my God, does that not sound exactly like a lot of the rhetoric that is out there right now, to like in putting people down and the whole victimology and stuff? So can you kind of just explain some of the thought process behind that, how you use that to recruit people, just in case someone hasn't seen that video?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the late 1980s, from my experience, from what I remember, your typical so-called white person didn't typically identify that way if you asked them to self-identify. I have this archetype I call Joe pissed off white kid. That's the kid I was always looking for, trying to recruit. And if I said to Joe pissed off white kid, like, who are you? He's going to say, well, my name's Joe Murphy. I'm American. My family's Irish. We're Catholic. My dad's in a union. We're Democrats or we're Republicans, whatever. Like, he's going to have a whole long list of ways to identify himself rather than racially.
Yeah.
And so I have to convince him that his racial identity is not an option, first of all. I'll tell him, like, look, Joe, you will be identified by the color of your skin by our enemies. But the enemies of our people are going to point out the color of your skin, which you can't change, which you can't hide. And they're going to brand you as white. So you better adopt that identity and run with it. Otherwise, you're going to be involuntarily part of this battle and in much worse shape than someone who is willfully joining it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can get Joe to buy into our racial identity at that point, now he's ripe to proceed to stage 2, which is to make him feel persecuted because of his racial identity. I would tell Joe back in the late 80s, they're going to blame everything wrong in the world on you. It's going to be your fault. Again, the pride by association of taking credit for whatever they think the white race has done also applies to the guilt by association, where, and interestingly, they'll be like, well, slavery is not my fault. Colonialism is not my fault. I'm not German. I didn't kill any Jews. Like, now, if it's a negative thing you're being associated with, it's a big injustice that you're associated with everybody. But if it's a good thing, then of course you leap at that.
Yeah.
But the point is once I can get Joe to identify as white, and then I start pointing out what I think are injustices in the world against white people. And many of these really require like a historical myopia. Back in nowadays, it's much easier for white nationalists to do this than it was in the late 80s. But in the late 80s, we would always point at Black Entertainment Television or the United Negro College Fund. And we'd say, how come there's no white entertainment television? How come there's no white American College Fund? And the answer to both those questions is because all television has been white entertainment television from the get-go. and white people have historically been helped into college from all sorts of directions, while Afro-American people have not been. But when you're conveniently ignorant of those truths, just on the surface, it does seem like an injustice. And so now you can kind of fan these flames of outrage in a person and get them angry. And once they buy into that they're persecuted because they're white, or they're persecuted for whatever arbitrary physical trait they have, now they're going to be very angry and ready to buy into your rhetoric about striking back.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would want to hear of white entertainment television and call it like the wet channel. That would sound weird. I don't think people would get a different image of what's on that channel.
There's probably channels like that somewhere out there.
Yeah,
you're right.
You know, it's funny, like we're talking about how people really frame this stuff nowadays and how similar it is to like the period where you're talking about the 80s, early 90s. And I think about when I was growing up. So I grew up through the 90s and the 2000s. And my group of friends was extremely diverse. Like I didn't even think twice about that. And I know people that grew up since then that have grown up in like small towns or something. They're like, we had like one black guy in our whole high school, but they still like they had exposure to that, and they don't seem to have like they don't think about it as, well, that's the black guy. Like, hey, everybody, the black guy's doing something,
right?
But now you see it's like a regression where we're going back to everything has to be framed as race, and that's it's like a very sad way that we've been going. Because you can help people out, you can help, whatever groups you need to get to where they need to be, but to purely identify them as that. And again, speaking to how you're kind of saying, like, they're going to associate, to all the good things, but it's an injustice if you associate to the bad things.
Right.
Well, it goes for the same. The same can be said for all the groups doing this now. It's like, well, you can't just take all the good, and when anything bad comes, you're like, no, that's not us. You can't just say that's all us. So it's the same thing. We're coming back around to it.
It is. I agree. It is very regressive. I think it's very important, though, before having this conversation to point out that like white supremacy is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like our society, Western society, and honestly, like the entire world for the past 400 years has been shaped by this toxic idea of race.
Yeah.
And this toxic idea that the lighter your complexion is, the more beautiful and worthy and noble you are, and the darker it is, the more evil and unworthy you are. Those are very real historical facts. The question is, though, do we want to carry this history around as a burden and then just like pass this burden on to our children and burden them with it as well? Or do we want to teach our children like, hey, this is what they got wrong in the past, and this is what we can get right that will actually liberate you from history, rather than carrying it like a burden on your shoulders. And race is a prime example of that. Race was concocted by racists to perpetrate racism 400 years ago in response to enslaved Africans and indentured Irish people like banding together against these wealthy elites. And the wealthy elites are like, we can't ever have this happen again. So what are we going to do? Race. That's what we're going to do. We're going to convince these poor white people that they have more in common with us, rich elites, than they do with their Afro-American neighbors, really. And honestly, while poor white people in the South of the United States were certainly better off than enslaved Africans, it wasn't by a whole lot.
Yeah.
By social stature, wealth, they were like slightly above where the enslaved Africans were, but nowhere near where the plantation owners were and like the real elites of society. And that lie carries on today. In that when very well-meaning people who want to address history with a truthful, objective lens, but they
that's almost impossible.
It is. I don't know. You completely remove subjectivity from history, but the thing is if you have an idea, you can just we can still have race in our society, but somehow get rid of racism. That just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I'm a big fan of American football, and in the end zones of every American football game, it says "End racism," which is awesome. Like, yes, let's absolutely end racism. but how do you end racism and continue race?
Yeah.
Which is inherently dehumanizing to say everyone who looks like you has this in common.
Yeah.
Whether it's white, black, or what have you. And so and yes, we can't just snap our fingers and be like, hey, race is done. That was good. Glad that's over. Like it's very embedded in our society. But I think we have to ask ourselves, are we just going to try to like rearrange the deck chairs on the racial Titanic?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we going to have a society where we teach our children that race is a horrible idea of the past and it's time to move past it and to see everyone as a unique individual rather than a political abstraction according to the amount of melanin they do or don't have in their skin?
Yeah, and that, I think you hit it right on the head there. Having people understand like it's an individual issue in a lot of ways, because I think people can take advantage of the group think, and when you just lump everybody into a group, especially when you look at like the US, some of the narratives down there are different than up in Canada. We have different histories and race relations with groups, but
Right.
When I look at like some of those groups of like, if you look at the white extremist type groups now, I don't like, my experience up here has been if a group shows up and they're the ones that everybody says is the fringe and they're the extremists, the white supremacist types, it's like 13 dudes who show up and they're not bringing anybody to their cause. That's the first part. The second part is people actually call them out. But on the other side of things, when we look at a lot of the other type of groups out there, whether it's based on race or ideology, we don't see that. We don't see the calling it out as much as possible. And I don't know why that is. And that's something that like maybe for future guests too, I'm trying to find people who can kind of frame this, but I just find it's like, yeah, the 13 guys show up and everyone's like, they're a bunch of losers. Their policies that they're saying are stupid. Like, we can't make you think something different. You have the freedom to believe what you want. Nobody's joining them. I don't see that, no one's going up and getting the pamphlet from them or anything. But boy, you can see that in a lot of these other things. People are traveling to different countries to join some groups now. So, in your experience, do you see a growth in this in the US, or is it something that maybe is shrinking, or where are we with that?
Yeah, so in a broad sense, humans have always had an issue with the complexity of the world, with the nuance of the world, and if you look back at human spirituality throughout human history, it's always been to like, whether it's, I'm a Buddhist, so whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or Judaism or Islam, Sikh, Hindu, whatever, all these religions are meant to kind of like create something in the world that you can orient by, like something that's not moving. From a Buddhist perspective, like, we're sitting here talking to each other, sitting in chairs and buildings on a planet Earth that's spinning around its axis like 20,000 miles an hour. And then the Earth itself is spinning around the sun exponentially faster than that. And we're all part of a solar system that's in a galaxy amongst other galaxies. And all these things are in constant motion. So it's a natural human thing to be like, okay, what's not in motion?
Yeah.
Can you give me one thing that's not moving just so I can put my finger on it and be like, okay, I know I have this fixed reference point in existence that'll just help me navigate all of this. So that's something that we all, I think, want as a human being. In Buddhism, like, the answer is like, there is no fixed reference point. So it's all going to move. But in our Abrahamic religions, especially if you're talking about the concept of God or Allah or Hashem, like these are things that don't move. These are things that are eternal and ever present, and that's why people have an affinity for it. But it also, to your point, makes it easy for people to corrupt this need that humans have to kind of manipulate people en masse in group identities. And that's a thing that really, like, I think betrays all it really illustrates the flat out wrongness of all these violent extremist groups, in that there is no person or idea that speaks for everyone who appears to be white.
Yeah.
There is no person or idea that speaks for everyone who appears to be black. There's no one who speaks for all Jews. There's no one who speaks for all Muslims. There's no one who speaks for all Christians. There are plenty of people who claim to, in every one of those scenarios, but it's kind of an indicator. Like, if you claim to speak for all white people, that's how I know you're wrong, because you don't.
Well, and even when you talk about like lumping everybody together, you look at white people, it's like, well, okay, they come from multitude of countries. Same with black people. It's like, not everybody's African American. There's black people who come from South America. They come from different countries, different continents.
Right.
But when it's convenient, we'll lump it all together. If we want to hate on somebody, or if we want to say they're the victim of everything. And I think it, as you're saying, humans do bad with the complexity of the world. And it's just easy to say, you're this, problem solved. Now we're going to start talking about that thing. And you're like, well, there's a lot more that goes into it. So
exactly.
Some of the groups too that I thought were interesting that you brought up, you call them like the anti-racist skinheads, which is hard to wrap my mind around. But even in the video, they look like skinheads. Like, they got the number one brush cut. And but they're against you. So I'm guessing, are they, in your time when you were going against them, is it the same kind of people that you see now? Like, are they saying the same things now? Is it the same rhetoric, the same anger and stuff? Like, what was it like back then having anti-racist skinheads?
Well, as I pointed out in the Business Insider video, it's important to understand that the first skinheads that came about in the skinhead counterculture were neither racist nor anti-racist. They were just like working class British kids, most of whom would have been racialized as white, but some of whom had ancestors from Pakistan or the West Indies. And they got together and they got drunk and they got in fights after football games, and they listened to ska and reggae. Like, they certainly were not white power racist, and they weren't necessarily anti-racist at the time. Those were the first skinheads. It was later on, about 15 years after the first skinheads came about, that the National Front, which was an outright fascist group in England, saw the potential for a kind of brown shirt amongst the white skinheads. And they got enough of them to buy into it that this entire offshoot of skinheads came about as the white power skinheads. And then in response to that, there was another offshoot of skinheads calling themselves anti-racist, anti-fascist skinheads. And that's where the actual two groups came from. But again, like, the idea of being an anti-fascist isn't new. Some of the most notorious fascists in human history started out as self-avowed anti-fascists, as in Stalin and Mao.
Yeah,
who both fashioned themselves as anti-fascists fighting for the liberation of people, when in reality they oppressed people at a scale heretofore unimagined in human history, and they're conservatively responsible for the deaths of about 100 million people. So this again, this brings up another thought I have about anti this or anti that. I quite often, if I'm doing a media piece or whatever, and if I don't get to talk to someone about it, they'll put a card down underneath my name and it'll say Arno Michaelis, anti-racist activist or anti-hate activist. And I'm like, I'm not anti anything. I'm not going to define myself by what I'm opposed to, because if I do that, I'm logically bound to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm an anti-hate activist, what am I if there's no hate?
Yeah.
To orient to? Like, I'm literally orienting to hate. If I'm an anti-racist activist, I logically cannot exist without racism.
Yeah.
I need racism to define who I am and what I do. And I don't think that's a really constructive way to go about an individual life, much less social change on a broad scale. So I define myself by what I'm for. I have schools that be like, hey, we need an anti-bullying program. And I'm like, I don't do anti-bullying, but I do pro-kindness and pro-compassion and pro-forgiveness and pro-gratitude. Like, focus on what you're for rather than what you're against. And again, I think that's another big indicator of an ideologies or a group's merit is if they are focused on what they're against, and if they claim to speak for an entire group. That to me are both disqualifiers for the validity of that ideology.
Yeah, and that's well put. I really like the part, like if they claim to speak for an entire group, you're like, red flag.
Right. Exactly.
Have you ever had any interactions with people like who wrote the anti-racism book, Ibrahim Kendi X or X Kendi or Robin
I've never met Ibram Kendi or Robin DiAngelo. I think, at least initially, I think people like that have good intentions, but at the same time, they're in a way they're kind of selling a snake oil, and that's why so many of them came to prominence during the summer of 2020 after George Floyd was murdered, because there was really a society from all angles and all people, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever, were like, hey, this is really messed up. We need to do something about racism. And to me, the real answer of doing something about racism is to start deconstructing race itself.
Yeah.
Race cannot exist, or excuse me, racism cannot function without race. It's very elementary, but that's not easy to do. It's not an easy fix.
Yeah.
So when people come around and say, well, if all of you white people just confess your racism and you confess your toxic, genocidal, colonizer, oppressor privilege, that's fragile, by the way, then you can be good white people and you can be part of the solution if you're doing the work. And enough people, people that aren't really down to sit and contemplate complexity and nuance. So if somebody says, hey, here's a real easy program where you can assuage all your white guilt just by confessing your racist, colonizer, fragile privilege, then here you go. And that's why so many people bought into it. I think nowadays we're certainly seeing a in many cases rightful backlash against that way of thinking, and a lot of this backlash is led by people who don't look like me.
Yeah,
it's people who are classically racialized as black or brown, but they're like, look, I'm more than my skin color. There's more to human existence than just slapping a label of black on me or white on me. Chloe Valdery is a brilliant young thinker in that space who's it comes to mind. She's the one who postulated that we're all unique individuals and not political abstractions. I think that's like one of the best ways to sum up the problem and what we need to do about it. Coleman Hughes is another. There's a growing number. Africa Brooke is brilliant. There's a growing number of really brilliant young thought leaders from a wide variety of backgrounds who are saying, like, look, race is a product of racism. It's not a solution to it.
You know, and another red flag that I was just jotting down here as you're saying, when you see a group and they say, like, yeah, you go admit to all these things and then you can be a good white person or whatever they're trying to put against you, but you can never join their group. So you can apologize all you want, but you're never a part of their group. So they'll always have something over you. And it's like, well, that's like when I deal with criminals and I arrest someone, the weakest form of relationship is if I'm dangling a charge over their head and I'm like, give me some info or else you're going to get a charge. Like, then they just give you something and then, well, that, you know, there's no relationship there. There's nothing built out of that. It's just transactional. And then I can see you in a week and I still can charge you, or I kind of own you in a way. It's like that's not real building relationships or bridges there. That's just, yeah. So just in the kind of amount of time we have left here, I want to ask about some of the work that you do now and just what you see out of that. Like, so when you're doing these interventions or you're trying to help out families, how successful are these processes? Because my thought is the success rate would be very low. Like, it takes a long time to steer somebody away from an ideology. It does not sound like easy work. So what's kind of the success rate that you see? And if something isn't successful, what do you do? Like, do you go back and go, okay, where did we go wrong with this person? Like, what do we have to change? Is that part of the process?
Yeah. So my title at Parents for Peace is I'm a peer exit specialist. People can find Parents for Peace at parentsforpeace.org with the number 4. We also have a toll-free nationwide helpline, I believe works in Canada as well. And that's 844-49-PEACE. And when someone calls that helpline, it's typically a person who has a loved one who's becoming radicalized or seems to be radicalized. It is typically parents that call, although sometimes we have siblings or significant others call. Sometimes we have the individuals themselves call for help. As we're really talking about hate as an addiction and treating it from the same lens of recovery that you would treat an addiction to alcohol or to hard drugs.
Yeah.
The more we kind of change that paradigm of how we look at violent extremism, the more we have actual individuals coming to us for help saying, hey, I need help. I need to change. I can't do it by myself. I need your help. And you're right. It's not easy work. Every case is different. There's similarities between all the cases. One is violent extremist ideologies. That's a similarity. We do have a typical call scenario. It's typically like, hey, my son, Joe Pissed Off White Kid, has been sitting, hasn't come out of the basement in a month, and he's online all the time. And the only time we do see him, he's going off about Jews and black people, or he's going off about Jews and Zionists, or he's going off about Jews and capitalists, or Jews and communists. It's always anti-Semitism. That's another common thread behind all this violent extremism. And they're looking for help. Like, what do we do about it? The part of the ubiquitous nature of screens nowadays is that's also a part of all the problems we have. We've never had a case where they say, yeah, little Johnny doesn't go on the internet all the time. Like, it just doesn't happen that way. These cases always present with severe screen addiction, severe internet addiction, where we have kids who are barely teenagers spending 14 hours a day on the internet.
Well, there's I don't know if you saw it, and I want to say it was the FBI. They just arrested a kid who was plotting to kill Trump, but there's...
In Wisconsin, where I'm from.
Yeah. And it talks about like him talking online. Like, they have quotes in there from his conversations with someone I think he thought was in Russia, and he's like going to go live another life in Russia. Then he's talking about assassinating the president, and he's talking about killing groups of people. And I was messaging with someone else here that's kind of Canadian based, and I was like, this kid is like the culmination of every type of extremism you could have. It was like religion and ideology. He's violent. Like, I couldn't imagine trying to unscramble just that puzzle that's going on in that head. That would be quite the work.
Well, and I have to remind myself on a daily basis, because it's my instinct as well, where if somebody says Jews are the root of all evil and they've done all these horrible things and they're our enemies, I'd say, well, no, they're not, and here's why. Like that's your normal instinctive reaction, and it's a fair reaction, and it's a true reaction as well. I make the point that since I've recovered from my anti-Semitism, I've spent decades with amazing Jewish people who are some of the best human beings I've ever met in my life. And that's really what drives my opposition to anti-Semitism, is that I know that, and Jews, like everyone else, are in a monolith. There's scumbag Jews out there. There's amazing Jews, just like any other group. But all of the Jews I've known in my life, again, some of whom for my entire life, some for decades, are some of the best human beings I've ever met.
Yeah.
And that to me is all the truth I need to blow all this anti-Semitic rhetoric out of the water. But the fact is when you're in a intervention de-radicalization type of scenario, the best thing to do is to not butt heads on facts, and instead to just listen and to create a connection and create a rapport, and honestly try to sift out of that like what's really going wrong in this person's life that's putting them in a position where they think these ideologies are appealing.
Yeah.
And if you can figure out what those pain points are and make moves to address those pain points, that's the best way to de-radicalize a person, is to say like, hey, if I notice you don't have any friends in real life, like what can we do to get you out in the world where you might meet some friends and be able to have some people to hang out with? I notice you're underemployed or unemployed, like what can we do to get you back in the job market? A very classic one is it's typically a bitter young man who doesn't have a girlfriend.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you don't have a girlfriend. Do you think that sequestering yourself in your mom's basement for the rest of your life and chatting with other angry incels online is going to improve your chances of finding a girlfriend? Or maybe do you want to like get out there and do stuff, go volunteer, go to a church group, go work out, go do things in the world that will not only put you in a scenario where you could meet someone, but also make you a person that would be more attractive to someone. And those are, again, it's not an easy answer. Yeah. The easy answer is, well, no, I'm going to stay in the basement. That's the easy answer.
I think you know that what you can sum that up with too is you can't force things on people. So if you force it on them, you're going to get resistance. If you force it too much, you're going to get a fight. So listening to them and letting some things happen naturally, right? They go, all of a sudden you have a job. And I think you mentioned this in the book, but when you got like a job outside of those groups and you start to see and interact with people because you have to for your employment or because of some other thing you're doing in life, you're like, okay, it's not fitting the narrative. So I think it'll be a good place to wrap it up here so we get you out on time. I want to just, the last thing, if you could let people know where they can follow you and how they can find your work. So parentsforpeace.org, I'll get the links up for that. And any social media.
Great. Yeah, social media, I just do LinkedIn and Instagram, and I'm Arno Michaelis on both of those. People are welcome to reach out. Happy to connect with people. I've had a lot of great conversations and it's just some really amazing interactions with interacting with people who sought me out after seeing stuff like this. So I'm always happy to engage like that. I only have so much bandwidth, so if someone reaches out and I don't get back right away, like give me a minute.
Yeah.
But definitely happy to connect with people.
Awesome. I want to say thanks for being on the show today, and hang on for just 2 seconds. I'll say bye offline.
Sure.
Hey everyone. Thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.